Start trying. All right. Hello. Oop, there we are. Okay. Oh, where am I? I'm in the dark. There we go. Yeah. Too much. Bright light. All right. Here we are once again, and we are going to do this if it kills me. Is my sound working? Yes, it is. Okay. This is the third time trying to do these last two articles. So it's going to happen. Damn it. So let me get back. So we've got two left. That's it. The Pulsar Mystery and the Physicist as Mystic. So let's jump right on into it. Now I'm paranoid. I keep looking at that voice, the mic feed to make sure it's actually working. All right. The Pulsar Mystery. Could the enigmatic phenomena be the work of an ancient ET civilization? A new scientific study makes the astonishing case. By Len Kasten. Before I get started, hydrate. All right. Logic would dictate that there must be some type of connection among all the worlds in our galaxy, the so-called Milky Way. Viewed from afar, it appears to be a single spiral-shaped unit with a luminous center. What forces operate to cause so many billions and billions of stars to cohere to this unit? They must be vast and incredibly powerful. Now, as we enter the 21st century, discovery of those forces is clearly the next frontier in physics and astronomy. It is the next step in the logical progression that began only 500 years ago with Columbus's discovery of the spherical shape of the planet. This logical progression continued with Galileo's heresy that the Earth revolves around the Sun, Kepler's discovery of elliptical orbits around the Sun, and then triumphantly completing the Copernican revolution, Newton's deduction in 1687 of the second law of mechanics and the law of universal gravitation, which elegantly proved Kepler's three laws of planetary motion. Then it wasn't until Sir William Herschel developed a powerful telescope in 1781 that we began to peer out into the cosmos and to comprehend its complexity and immensity, and to understand that what we thought were clouds of cosmic dust were actually countless other stars like our sun. Herschel, his son John, and his daughter Caroline eventually cataloged over 4,200 star clusters, nebula, and galaxies, thus setting the stage for the modern era of astronomy. Then, with the orbital placement of the Hubble telescope in 1990, we finally began to understand our stellar nature. Become known as the Local Group is dominated by our Milky Way and the giant spiral galaxy Andromeda, but also includes some minor galaxies. But even now, with all that we do know, we still know almost nothing about the implications of membership in our galaxy. Has our solar system simply been fortuitously captured by the immense centrifugal force of the galactic hub, or does the entire galaxy somehow act as an organic whole? Galactic explosions. Thanks to the author Paul Laviolette, PhD, we begin to appreciate that certain galactic events have a very profound physical effect on our little sun and planet way out here in the outer reaches of a spiral arm. Laviolette, a physicist with a doctorate in systems theory, has postulated that the existence of something called a galactic superwave. In his Survival of the Apocalypse, he claims that astronomical and geological evidence suggests that a protracted global climactic disaster occurred on this planet about 15,000 years ago. One piece of this evidence derives from a new technique developed by scientists in the late 1970s measuring the constant element beryllium-10 in ice core samples drilled in Vostok, East Antarctica. Minute quantities of this rare isotope are produced when high-energy cosmic rays collide with nitrogen and oxygen atoms in our stratosphere. Since a time frame can be associated with each layer of the ice core sample by measuring the BE10 concentrations at various levels, the fluctuations of cosmic bombardments of Earth can be precisely determined. The Vostok samples clearly showed a peak of cosmic radiation between 17,500 and 14,150 years ago, associated with a sharp increase in the ambient air temperature from -10 Celsius to about 0 Celsius. This, claims Laviolette, caused the end of the Ice Age and ushered in the era of moderate temperatures that made modern civilization possible. This concept of the galactic superwave, apparently caused by massive explosions at the galactic core, is not entirely new to astronomers. However, they view them as relatively rare events, occurring perhaps every 10 million to 100 million years, and having no particular effect on our solar system because they believe that the galactic magnetic lines of force prevent cosmic radiation from propagating very far from the core. But Laviolette has amassed an impressive profusion of evidence from many different sources that these events are much more frequent and that they are massive bombardments of cosmic ray particles, electrons, positrons, and protons, with the power of 5 to 10 million highly charged supernova explosions that reach in full strength to the farthest limits of the galaxy. The theories of Paul Laviolette, are highly controversial in astronomy circles, even though he makes his case with careful and thorough research. Perhaps it is because he is not afraid to boldly go where other scientists fear to tread, into the realm of myth and legend to find supporting evidence for his theories. His book, The Talk of the Galaxy, an ET Message for Us, puts forth another daring proposition. He argues that pulsars are high-tech galactic beacons, very likely created by highly developed extraterrestrial civilizations, and are being used to signal the advent of galactic events, especially the superwaves. These books, taken together, sketch out a fantastic scenario that radically changes the status quo of the astronomical, anthropological, and archaeological landscapes, and opens up a new universe of potential research and investigation. Laviolette may well be just the pivotal researcher to lift science out of a stale, inbred stagnation into invigorating human-oriented realms and new directions for the 21st century. In view of the importance of his theory, we set up an interview for the purposes of this article. When we spoke with him, we were surprised at how deftly he was able to shift back and forth from science to mythology to support his ideas. Continuous creation versus Big Bang. Perhaps one of Laviolette's most heretical theories relates to the purpose of these galactic core explosions. His explanation resurrects that Laviolette is convinced that these tremendous energy discharges are nothing less than an ongoing process of the creation of matter itself from the etheric flux, which invisibly pervades the entire universe. This idea of continuous creation is in direct opposition to the now generally accepted Big Bang theory, which most esotericists have never really been comfortable with, but which does seem to satisfy those religious groups who believe that creation was literally a single primordial act by God. A complete discussion of this subject can be found in Laviolette's book, Genesis of the Cosmos, The Ancient Science of Continuous Creation, and also in his follow-up book, Subquantum Kinetics, The Alchemy of Creation. The concept of the all-pervasive etheric substratum from which matter is created was really originally derived from the ancient Hindu metaphysics, but had gained considerable scientific credence up until the late 19th century, when it was supposedly put to bed by the famous Michelson-Morley experiment in 1887. However, this experiment was seriously flawed because it assumed the ether to be another physical dimension rather than a precursor to energy itself. Today, although orthodox science may not have granted respectability to etheric theory, it certainly doesn't mind using it every day to explain the propagation of radio and television waves. Fire and flood. According to Laviolette, the galactic explosive phases occur about every 10,000 to 20,000 years and last anywhere from several hundred to several thousand years. That's quite a broad. Anyway, evidence of this frequency began emerging in 1977, but scientists considered it an aberration. The electrons and positrons travel radially outward from the core at near light speed, but the protons travel much more slowly because they are about 2,000 times heavier. They disperse and are then captured by the magnetic fields in the galactic nucleus. The superwave itself would not normally have much of an effect on the Sun or Earth, since the energy would be about 1,000th of that radiated by the Sun. But the solar system is surrounded by a cloud of dust and frozen cometary debris that remains on the periphery because of the solar wind, which has an expelling action and cleanses the entire solar system. However, the superwave, when it arrives, would push back the dust cloud into the interplanetary medium and would block out the light of the sun, moon, and stars, and the sun would appear to go dark. Also, the superwave and dust particles would energize the sun and increase flaring activity so much that dry grasslands and forests would spontaneously catch fire. This heat would also melt the glaciers, releasing tremendous quantities of water, causing extensive flooding all over the planet. A whole panoply of cascading catastrophes would then ensue, including earthquakes and increased seismic activity, high winds, failed crops, and destroyed vegetation, along with high ultraviolet radiation causing skin cancers and increased mutation rates. In short, it would be a time of cataclysmic destruction that would probably snuff out much of the human and animal life on the planet. Laviolette, in Earth Under Fire, cites all the legends and myths relating to cataclysmic events, all of which appear to have occurred during the time of the last galactic superwave, that is, about 15,000 years ago. The Greek myth of Phaeton, for example, the semi-mortal son of Helios, the sun god, who was given the reins of the sun chariot and caused it to crash into the earth, thereby setting off a tremendous worldwide conflagration. It is claimed to be a metaphor for that era when the superwave caused an extraordinary increase in infrared and ultraviolet emissions from the sun, along with ultra-high flaring activity. This could easily have caused a scorched earth phenomenon, according to Laviolette. The Greek writer Ovid says of this event, quote, "Great cities perish, together with their fortifications, and the flames turn whole nations into ashes." End quote. Then, as the glaciers melted and the ocean levels rose all over the world, large land masses would have become submerged. This might easily account for the flood legends in just about every ancient civilization. Laviolette compiled a list of about 80 societies with some sort of flood myth. He has no doubt that the deluge that sank Atlantis was caused by glacial meltwater. He says, quote, "The sinking of Atlantis simply refers to the melting and ultimate wasting of the continental ice sheets, which spawned a foray of destructive glacier wave floods." End quote. Interestingly, the Phaeton myth concludes with massive flooding sent by Zeus to quell the flames. According to Plato's Timaeus, this would have occurred about 11,550 years ago, right around the time of the last stage of the superwave. Little Green Men. In The Talk of the Galaxy, Laviolette turns his attention to those puzzling anomalies of astronomy, the pulsars. Having established in his earlier books a very convincing case of galactic events that affect all the worlds therein, it was natural to question whether or not pulsars have any connection with these events. The fact that they emitted such consistently regular pulsations suggested to him that they were of intelligent origin. This was not a new theory. Several scientists involved in the SETI project have speculated on this subject. Laviolette tells us that the Professor Alan Barrett, a radio astronomer, theorized in a New York Post article in the early 70s that pulsar signals, quote, "might be part of a vast interstellar communications network which we have stumbled upon," end quote. It was, in fact, the first thought that occurred to the two astronomers who discovered the first pulsar signal in July 1967 at Cambridge University in England. Graduate student Jocelyn Bell and her astronomy professor Anthony Hewish named the source of this signal LGM1, an acronym for Little Green Men. By the time they published their astonishing discovery in Nature magazine in February 1968, having discovered a second pulsar, they were afraid to suggest an ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence, thesis because they feared ridicule from colleagues. and where discovery would not be taken seriously by scientists, but nevertheless they continued with this naming convention up until LGM-4. Of the many theories advanced to explain pulsars, the one that had prevailed by 1968 and is still accepted today by default is known as the neutron star lighthouse model. Proposed by Thomas Gold, it postulates that the signal comes from a rapidly rotating, burned-out star that has gone through a supernova explosion that transformed it into a bunch of tightly packed neutrons. This would have made it incredibly dense and much smaller, reduced from about 3 times the size of the Sun to no more than 30 kilometers. Gold theorized that as it rotates, it emits a synchrotron beam, which, much like a lighthouse beacon, which is picked up on Earth as a brief radio pulse. To match the pulsar frequencies, these stars would have to spin at least up to 100 times per second. Signal complexity. La Violette has compiled a very impressive and convincing set of reasons why the pulsars are very likely of intelligent rather than natural origin, and why they cannot possibly fit the neutron star model. They all relate to the fact that the signal is totally unlike any other ever encountered in terms of both precision and complexity. Of major importance is the fact that the pulses are timed not precisely from pulse to pulse, but only when time averaged over 2,000 pulses. Then the time average pulse is exceedingly accurate and regular. Furthermore, in some pulsars, the pulse drifts at a constant rate, adding another layer of complexity to the signal. Another factor has to do with amplitude modulation. Some of the pulses increase in amplitude in varied yet regular patterns. Then many of the pulses exhibit something called mode switching, wherein the pulse suddenly exhibits an entirely new set of characteristics that persist for a time, and then it reverts to its original mode. In some cases, this switch is frequency dependent, and in others, the switching conforms to regular patterns. La Violette argues that an ET civilization would expect us to understand that such a complex signal must necessarily be intelligently designed. Perhaps they assume that we have the computer power necessary to comprehend the logic behind all the variability. The neutron star model has to be continually stretched to encompass these characteristics as they are discovered. At this point, it has been contorted beyond recognition in order to explain this complexity, but astronomers are reluctant to abandon the sizable mental investment involved, quote unquote. In terms of precision, some stars do show periodic regular variations in color and luminosity. Several binary X-ray stars pulse with periods accurate to 6 or 7 significant digits. Pulsars, on the other hand, are from 1,000,000 to 100 billion times more precise. La Violette speculates that if Bell and Hewish, quote, had known then what we know now, perhaps they would not have rejected the ETI communication scenario as readily as they did, end quote. Marker beacons. Perhaps the most striking of all pulsar characteristics is their placement in the galaxy. When their positions are plotted within the galactic globe, which is a projection of the galaxy similar to the Mercator for Earth, they all seem to congregate in certain key locations. The densest concentration is found on or near the galactic equator, not the galactic center, or as one would have expected if they were created out of supernova explosions as theorized. Then they seem to clump around 2 points along the equator. These 2 points are precisely at the 1 radian marks measured from Earth. A radian is a universally understood geometric measurement of an angle that marks off an arc around the circumference equal in length to the circle's radius, and is always 57.296 degrees. Using the Earth as the center of the circle and placing the galactic center on the equator, perhaps the most significant pulsar in the galaxy falls precisely at a 1 radian mark. The so-called millisecond pulsar is the fastest out of all 1100 discovered to date. It beats at 642 pulses per second. It is also the most precise in timing, being accurate to 17 significant digits, which surpasses the best atomic clocks on Earth, and it emits optically visible high-intensity pulses. LaViolette believes that the millisecond pulsar was deliberately placed there by ETs to function as a marker beacon for our solar system, as they knew we would understand the significance of the 1 radian point. LaViolette's main thesis is that all of the pulsars visible to Earth were put in place in order to convey a message to us relative to the galactic superwave. This, he says, explains why too complex to explain here, pulsars, that LaViolette calls the king and queen of pulsars, were positioned in the Crab and Vela nebula, both of which are the sites of supernova explosions. He estimates that after reaching the Earth about 14,130 years ago, the last superwave would have reached the Vela complex about 100 years later and detonated a supernova there by heating up the unstable stars to the explosion point. Then about 6,300 years later, it would have reached the Crab Nebula and triggered a supernova there. These very large supernovas would have become visible on Earth at 11,250 BC and CE 1054, respectively. By placing marker beacons at these points, LaViolette believes the ETs were giving us information about that superwave that we could use to predict future waves, along with their associated cataclysmic effects. LaViolette believes that we already have the technology to build our own force field beaming technology. Therefore, the day may not be far off when Earthlings can join the galactic community and help to inform some other unfortunate planet of the approach of a fearsome galactic superwave. And that is the end of that article. Some pretty interesting stuff I didn't know about pulsars, and I had never heard of the superwave theory at all, but it fits with... excuse me, I need to breathe more deeply. What was I saying? Oh, it fits right in with the end of the Younger Dryas and the theories behind that. I know some of the theories that have been in this book, actually, were that a huge comet struck the ice cap, and the heat of that melted the cap and caused all these catastrophic floods and stuff. Well, what if it was a superwave that did it and not a comet? Because the reason they're saying the comet hit the ice cap, comets are mostly made of ice, and the ice cap is made of ice. Therefore, when the comet struck, it just disintegrated, basically into water vapor, and joined with the other melting ice cap water, and that's why we can't find any evidence of it. But what if there was no comet and it just was the wave? Then there wouldn't be any evidence of an impact there either. So just a thought. Anyway, moving on to the very last article in the book, and yes, my sound is still working. Yay! Third time's charm. This is Article 42, The Physicist as Mystic, by David Lewis. A child staring at the clear night sky beholds the wonder of the universe and its mystery. How, after all, to such a simple mind, to any mind, can the starry expanse go on and on, never ending? For if it were to end, we imagine there would always be something beyond. And then what about the beginning and before that, and so on? The two apparent extremes describe what the French philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal called les deux infinis, the two infinities. As science probes this mystery, subatomically and cosmically, it searches within the domain of finite understanding for its answer. Since Darwin, Western scientists have told us that matter gave birth to reality, to life, that reality is concrete, which is to say finite, the wonder of infinity as observed on a starry night notwithstanding. But in its attempt to define reality, to put it into an intellectual box, materialistic science finds itself in the land of mystics, the realm it sought to avoid all along. Why is my video that's showing up on Twitch is way out of focus. It's all fuzzy. Is that a Twitch thing? Because it looks like crap. Anyway, I will continue on. I mean, you can't read the subtitles, but okay, it looks good there. On my screen, it's all fuzzy and pixelated. That's weird. All right. So moving on then. Delving deeply, relentlessly into any subatomic particle in the universe, cutting-edge physicists find that nothing is as it appears to be. Indeed, they find that the physical universe is but a ripple in an ocean of infinite energy. Even as hangers-on, such as Paul Kurtz and his Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, and so many others in the material sciences assert that nothing exists beyond matter. They assert, in fact, that matter is ultimate reality. Unfortunately for the absolute materialists, though, the tide turned some time ago. Early in the 20th century, Albert Einstein amazed the world with his discoveries in the world of astrophysics. With his general theory of relativity, he opened the door of science to the M word, mysticism. He told us that space and time are intertwined, relative coordinates in reality that make up the space-time continuum. He also suggested that matter is inseparable from an ever-present quantum energy field, that it is a condensation of that field, and that this ineffable field is the sole reality underlying all appearances. The implications brought into question the Western world's most basic assumptions about the universe, about matter, and about our perception as human beings. Einstein, though, only opened the door to the mystical realm. Much more followed. Quantum theory evolved beyond Einstein's landmark discoveries. Physicists, in their quest to define matter's essential properties, found that the most minute particle in the universe, protons, electrons, photons, and so on, the very fabric of the material universe, transcend three-dimensional reality. Electrons, they discovered, are not matter in any standard sense. The diameter of an electron, for instance, cannot be measured. An electron can be shown to be two things at once, both a wave and a particle, each with differing characteristics that should exclude the other's existence from a purely material viewpoint. As particles, they behave like a larger visible object, a basketball or a rock. As waves, though, electrons mysteriously shapeshift into vast energy clouds. They display magical properties stretching across space with the apparent ability to bilocate. Physicists have discovered, moreover, that these magical abilities characterize the entire subatomic universe, adding a mind-boggling dimension and a mystical one to the nature of the universe itself. Even more astounding revelations waited in the world of physics. The observer modern physics found actually determines the nature of a subatomic particle. When physicists observe particles as particles, they find them, understandably, to be particles. But when observing the same particle as waves, they find them to be waves, the implication being that matter is defined by conscious perspective rather than being fixed or finite. Now, that is kind of a mind-blowing concept to me. And that would apply to so many things. I wonder if that's why they've said for decades that light is both a particle and a wave. So, yeah. So if all of the subatomic particles are both particles and waves, boy, wow. Okay. Next section. A more profound understanding. The physicist David Bohm, one of Einstein's protégés, delved more deeply into this mystery. He took the implications of the new physics even further. He discerned that if the nature of subatomic particles depends on an observer's perspective, then it is futile to search for a particle's actual properties, as was science's goal, or to think that subatomic particles, the essence of matter, even exist before someone observes them. In his plasma experiments at the Berkeley Radiation Laboratory, Bohm found that individual electrons act as part of an interconnected whole. In plasma, a gas composed of electrons and positive ions in high concentrations, electrons more or less assume the nature of a self-regulating organism, as if they were inherently intelligent. Bohm found to his amazement that the subatomic sea he created was conscious. By extension, the vast subatomic reality that is material creation may also be said to be conscious. Interesting. Kind of I'm not going to say it just yet. I'll bring that up later. To those who foresaw the implications, Bohm shattered the useful but limiting premise that led science to its many achievements in modern times, crossing a new barrier beyond which lurked the unknown, a scientific twilight zone. Intellectual observation, it turned out, the fulcrum of the scientific method, since Francis Bacon, could take an observer only so far. As with any dogma, what was once a useful guideline became a stifling limitation, negating the ability of the human intellect alone to fathom ultimate reality. Bohm then challenged the scientific world to adopt a more profound understanding. Reality, Bohm's work suggests, has a more subtle nature than that which can be defined by linear human thinking, the province of modern science and the intellect. Within the fabric of reality, Bohm found not just the wave-particle duality phenomenon as described above, but also an interconnectedness, a non-space or non-local reality, where only the appearance of waves, also being particles, exists. He saw perhaps intuitively that it is ultimately meaningless to see the universe as composed of parts or disconnected as everything is joined, space and time being composed of the same essence as matter. Okay. A subatomic particle, then, does not suddenly change into a wave at velocities that would have to be beyond the speed of light, as Bohm's mentor Einstein suggested. It already is a wave sharing the same non-space as the particle. Reality, then, is not material in any common sense of the word. It is something far more ineffable. Physicists call this non-locality. Mystics call it oneness. In spite of those who disagree, Bohm evolved a yet more profound understanding, that of an interconnected whole with a conscious essence, where all matter and events interact with one another, because time, space, and distance are an illusion relative to perspective. He developed, in fact, a holographic model of the universe in which the whole can be found in the most minute part, in a blade of grass or an atom, and where matter, circumstance, and dimension result from holographic projections of subtle but powerful conscious energy. Kind of the God particle idea, a little bit, I think, if I understand it right. Actual location and, by extension, the shape-shifting of particles both manifest reality. In fact, they exist only in the context of relative appearances. Bohm discovered that everything is connected to everything else, past, present, and future, as well as time, space, and distance, because it all occupies the same non-space and non-time. David Bohm brought into physics and the scientific world the understanding that has propelled mystics and sages since the dawn of time. Rejecting the idea that particles do not exist until they are observed, he, like the Nobel laureate and renowned physicist Brian Josephson, understood that physics must see the nature of subatomic reality in a new way. It is not simply that conscious perspectives affect the nature of the subatomic quanta. Bohm revealed but that the subatomic quanta is conscious, which means that everything is conscious, even inanimate objects and seemingly empty space, the very definition, if one were possible, of mystical or spiritual reality. And this is where I pointed out the first two times I tried reading this. It's animism is what they're talking about there. Which is one of the oldest religious thinking. They think that it's been around probably since the cavemen, the Neanderthals, and the reason they have come to that conclusion is they were using what was called sympathetic magic, or what we call sympathetic magic. So they would make like a clay sculpture of a auroch. I think that's the word, right? Is that the bovine type thing? Anyway, whatever, a deer, and then they would actually hunt the clay object. They would actually destroy it with their spears. They would use it for target practice. And so the theory, of course, we can never know for sure, is that it was sympathetic magic, and it was to give them luck in the hunt, and it was because they were actually taking the life of this inanimate object in place of the deer, and it was kind of like giving the universe the signal, hey, let us go kill a deer. I'm not explaining that very well, but I think you kind of get the point. It's animism. Everything, this book has a consciousness, this desk has a consciousness. That's animism. And it has a soul. Anyway, hallowed space. Most physicists agree that a mere cubic centimeter of space brims with more energy than the sum of all the energy held in the entire material universe. One school of physics finds this calculation so incredible that it assumes it must be a mistake. But to those such as Bohm, the principle makes perfect sense. Matter, according to the avant-garde of subatomic physics, cannot ultimately be separated from what appears as empty space. It is rather a part of space, and part of a deeper, invisible order for which realities unseen, conscious essence precipitates as material form and then returns to the invisible again. Space, then, is not empty, but instead filled with highly concentrated, conscious energy, the source of everything in existence. That's God particle. My understanding of God particle. Maybe I'm wrong. If you're a physicist and you're watching this and you want to correct me, please do. In The Holographic Universe, an elaboration upon the implication of Bohm's genius, Michael Talbot describes all the material creation as a ripple, a pattern. Oh, this is a quote. Ripple, a pattern of excitation in the midst of an unimaginably vast ocean. End quote. Talbot goes on to say, paraphrasing Bohm, that, quote, despite its apparent materiality and enormous size, the universe does not exist in and of itself, but is the stepchild of something far vaster and more ineffable, end quote. Talbot tells Bohm's story, capsulizing the implications of his revelations and the modern science's implicit nihilism. Bohm, Talbot says, believes that our almost universal tendency to fragment the world and ignore the dynamic interconnectedness of all things is responsible for many of our problems. We believe we can extract the valuable parts of the earth without affecting the whole, treat parts of our body and not be concerned with the whole, deal with crime, poverty, and drug addiction without addressing society as a whole. Bohm, Talbot says, believes that such a fragmented approach may even bring about our ultimate destruction. The problem, then, is reconciling modern science, even modern physics, with the wonder a child feels while staring at a clear night sky. Le Dieu infini remains the dogma of absolute materialism, of non-interconnectedness. Although the tide has turned in certain circles within the scientific community, matter, we are still told, is the source of all life. Nothing truly mysterious exists, they say, contrary to Einstein's belief that appreciation of the mysterious lies in the center of all true science. In Letters to a Friend, Darwin himself argued strenuously in favor of gradualism, the theory that all life evolved slowly and inexorably from primitive matter without sudden changes, in order to avoid supporting any possible supernatural or biblical creation theories. That bias, we now find, remains fixed to such a degree that absolute materialism has become the established dogma of the scientific and academic worlds. According to Alan Bloom, a professor at the University of Chicago, the suggestion of the existence of absolute evil is looked on with derision in academic circles. He reveals in Closing of the American Mind that absolutism is taboo in university classrooms. No underlying order or intelligence can exist in the universe, the academics say. The avant-garde of theoretical physics, however, arrive with a new take on a very ancient philosophical and metaphysical absolute. Ancient wisdom and modern science. Genesis of the Cosmos, Paul Laviolette's book about ancient myth and the science of continuous creation, reveals an extraordinarily persistent message encoded throughout the ancient mythologies of the world, a message now echoed by quantum cosmologists such as Stanford's Andre Linde and even Cambridge's Stephen Hawking. Passed down to modern times from the mists of prehistory, these ancient myths repeatedly describe principles now pointed to in the newest of the new physics, that of a universal potential latent within all reality. Quote, in all cases, Laviolette says, the concept, the myths, convey effectively portrays how an initially uniform and featureless ether self-divides to produce a bipolar wave pattern, end quote. Laviolette elaborates, telling us an ancient creation science comes down to us through myth, which, quote, conceives all physical form, animate or inanimate, to be sustained by an undercurrent of process, a flux of vital energy that is present in all regions of space. Thus the ancient creation science infers the presence of lifelike consciousness or spirits in all things, even in inanimate objects such as rocks and rivers or the earth itself." End quote. While supporting his premise with the principles of quantum physics, La Violette speaks to the materialists who inhabit the world of modern science. Quote, "This view of a vast living beyond contrasts sharply with the sanitized mechanistic paradigm which has denied the existence of an unseen supernatural realm and forged a wedge between science and religion." End quote. High priests of physics, such as the Nobel laureate Steven Weinberg and other notable physicists, clearly leave the door open to La Violette's continuous creation, syncretizing, according to the physicist Michio Kaku of the City University of New York, Judeo-Christian, Buddhist, and scientific cosmologies. The high priests who express the likelihood of parallel universes or a multiverse in which our reality is one of many that exist in non-time, non-space, a principle that sounds like the scientific version of transcendental existence. Addressing the Big Bang Theory's inability to account for what happened before the Big Bang, Kaku, in an article in the London Daily Telegraph, quotes Weinberg as saying, quote, "An important implication is that there wasn't a beginning. The multiverse has been here all along." End quote. Grappling with how extremely unlikely it is that our reality, let alone another, ever presented conditions that would support biological life, Princeton's Freeman Dyson says ominously for the materialists, "It's as if the universe knew we were coming." Beyond the Veil, last section. The principles that science now begins to embrace, those of an inherently intelligent universe, have, of course, been espoused for thousands of years. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe the nature of Purusha, supreme consciousness, and Chittam, or mind stuff, as fundamental to the nature of reality. The mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms exist as grades of supreme consciousness, and man, being highly conscious, participates in the vast flow of subtle consciousness. Here the mind is a miniature universe, and the universe is the expansion of mind. And while the debate still rages in Western science, throughout history, practitioners of the yoga science report as actual conscious experience what the high priests of physics relegate to abstract theory. In an exalted state of consciousness, for example, the great yogi Paramhansa Yogananda, who spent much of his life in the United States, experienced his own awareness merge with cosmic consciousness, having devoted himself to that goal for many years. In his famous autobiography, Yogananda describes his experience. Quote, "My sense of identity was no longer confined to a body," he says, "but embraced the circumambient atoms. My ordinary frontal vision was now changed to a vast spherical sight, simultaneously all perceptive, all melted into a luminescent sea. The unifying light alternated with materializations of form." End quote. After describing a state of ecstatic joy, the renowned yogi goes on to say, quote, "A swelling glory within me began to envelop towns, continents, the earth, solar and stellar systems, tenuous nebula, and floating universes. The entire cosmos glittered within the infinitude of my being." End quote. In the jargon of modern physics, this experience might be described as non-locality in the electron sea. In the jargon of yoga, it is called oneness with supreme consciousness, ultimate being, or God. Like sages before him for thousands of years, Yogananda describes the universe beyond matter as being composed of indescribably subtle light. He describes the material universe as being composed of the same essence, but in a grosser form. a principle echoed throughout the world's mystical traditions and now in modern physics. Regarding the source of this light, Yogananda says, quote, "The divine dispersion of rays poured from an eternal source, blazing into galaxies, transfigured with ineffable auras. Again and again I saw the creative beams condense into constellations, then resolve into sheets of transparent flame. By rhythmic reversion, sextillion worlds passed into diaphanous luster, then fire became firmament." End quote. Perhaps more significant, the sage tells us that his experience of the center of all light and creation poured from a point of intuitive perception in his heart, not from his intellect, a point that emphasizes the limits of the Western scientific method. And while Western science may balk at such a subjective account, claiming it lacks scientific verification, those mystics who have devoted themselves to absolute perception throughout history report similar experiences. The yogic science practiced within the laboratory of human consciousness is, in fact, the science of consciousness, which physicists such as Bohm theorize as being inseparable from and responsible for all reality. In his own way, our wonder-struck child beneath the stars probably draws the same conclusion. The end. The rest of the book, there are 20 or 30 pages here. They are a kind of a bibliography divided up by chapter. So all the various chapters that we've gone through, the different sections, all have their own mini bibliography. So yeah. Well, and they're calling each, I was numbering the articles, they're calling each article a chapter. So there are 42 mini bibliographies here, which is great. So I intend to do a bit of going through that, seeing what I have that's in this list, and maybe adding that to the docket, as it were. So anyway, that's it. We are done with this book. We can now move on to the next book, which I know I announced it on my other two attempts to finish this reading. I don't know if I put it up anywhere else, but that is going to be Atlantis and the Kingdom of the Neanderthals. That is what we'll be starting on Sunday night. It's going to be an interesting read. It's Colin Wilson. He's written a ton of stuff. It's going to be interesting. 100,000 Years of Lost History. Don't have to believe it, but if you want to listen to it, it should be a fun book to go through. So that'll be it. We will finish up this session. Yeah, we're right at an hour. Finish up this session, and I'm going to take a quick break and come back to play some Fallout 3. Yeah, that's what I'm playing. So I will see you in a few minutes. Oh, check out my new animated screens, too. Let me know what you think of those.